we travel again, and I still don't know, and obviously vaccines and all these sort of things. But if I was in a room of politicians, I certainly would be yelling at them for kind of trying to shift our arts and cultures into infrastructure and kind of the devastating things that have been happening to, I can see there's been money shipped over and then money taken back and all sorts of stuff around. I'm kind of really realised that we have a huge venue outside, and we can kind of look at, drawing our work outside of gallery spaces and back into landscapes and bringing people together as storytellers, or, back where we all started from. And I find that really powerful, because it actually makes people really start to re-engage with the environment. I really got kind of thinking like, oh, this was an opportunity after going through the trauma about, are we all going, what's going to happen to us, with COVID. But then I was like, I was hit with loss of work and income, and went through all these things. And I was like, oh, do I apply to try and get money, or what do I do? And I stuffed all that up, to be honest. And I just kind of wanted to go into a regroup of family, and my wall was sort of covered in projects, and it was like, are they going to go ahead now? What's the future going to look like? But then it was like, oh wow, we've got an opportunity to reset, as people. And before COVID, I think, Pat, you remember, I went over to Wales on a residency which was around climate change.
Yeah.
And I did some work around climate change, and then I came back and was sort of like, I was unpacking that work, and then we're hit with a pandemic, which was like, and I feel like I see that, to me, all this stuff's related, and it's like, what are we doing as human beings? And we have an opportunity to reset, and everybody just wants to go, there's economy and there's health. And then it's like, quick, let's get back to the normal, which was destroying our environment and breaking down the things that I love, which is trying to build back the village. I really focus some of my work now around gathering people and storytelling, and it's building back the village, about community and structure and those important things. So I think, I do get in the room with politicians, and they tell me on one hand that arts and culture is really important part of fabric, but on the other of the community, but on the other side, they don't put the money where the mouth is. So
and there is no federal arts portfolio anymore.
No. And I was actually, I was in Canberra when I was sitting in Parliament watching ScoMo deliver that. And I nearly got kicked out of the gallery. That was when I was in Canberra last year. So
very frustrating times. Melentie, the project opened in your gallery for a very short period, and opened and then closed in a very short period of time. That must have been particularly frustrating for you, after having put the intense amount of work it gets to get a fleet of boats into your gallery. What was your away from the project, even in that short time?
So Colin came over when we were setting up the exhibition. So he was kind of aware of what we're doing and how seriously we're preparing. And Sera was also there. Hi, Sera. We were open for about 2 weeks, I think. And then it was, we were supposed to have a big opening of the Fringe Festival as well. Mount Gambier started a Fringe Festival some 5 years ago, first as a satellite event of the Adelaide Fringe Festival, but then we started our own. So then the exhibition was supposed to be a big part of the festival as well. And then the festival didn't happen. We actually realized that it wouldn't happen maybe a day before it should have opened. So it was really strange. We weren't really getting clear guidelines as to what's happening, because the state wasn't passing on the clear guidelines to the local government, and the local government wasn't passing them on to us as well. So it was.
I just wanted to ask you, like, when the exhibition arrived in the gallery, did it strike you as an exhibition with any kind of difference, or did it really look like a regular art exhibition, or what do you think it brought along with it?
No, it was very different. It was obvious that it was very different. I just wish that more people had seen it. And in line with your question about the closing of the borders, Mount Gambier is a bit atypical because we are a border town. So we rely a lot on those tourists that come over from Victoria in terms of who sees our exhibitions. So even when we reopened, really a lot of our audience stayed behind the border in Victoria, and the number of people that are arriving has lowered quite a bit because we have to add that the amount of students, which is much lesser than it used to be, and overall even though we were more or less open, we were closed, I don't know, maybe 6-7 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. After that, we reopened our doors, but it wasn't the same feeling. It wasn't, people weren't at ease, to go into galleries. You have to go to the supermarket, but whether you have to go to the gallery, that's a bit questionable, isn't it? So yeah, I think a lot of questions were raised about, what to do, how to best protect yourself. But then you see that there are also, niches of the population that rely on other people more than others. So I became a driver and a delivery guy for Meals on Wheels. So council took over that role because a lot of the people who were driving with, and delivering food to retirement homes and other houses around the city, weren't able to do that. So then council asked who would like to volunteer, and I volunteered, and, as did quite a few of my colleagues. In the beginning, we were a bit frightened, but after that, it became the best thing we ever did in life, I think.
I think that's a really interesting point, Melentie, because I'm wondering whether our galleries are going to be called upon to do more civic services and become, if this persists, and I know we've got a vaccine just about to happen, but I wonder if the fear won't still persist. And as you say, going in and standing with a piece of art may come right down on the food chain when you're looking after your own health and safety and those of your family. So going from that point back to what Dave was saying, there's going to be, I think, an upsurge of works of art that are maybe made beyond gallery walls. But Sera, tell me, what's your experience and your thoughts on the exhibition, on what changed over the way, where you might see the future leading for the kind of work that you're making that draws from the community, but has probably more often than not used gallery spaces?
Yeah. And I think, like Dave and like other people have indicated, I too am thinking outside of the gallery space a lot more than I have in the past. I have quite relied upon, I guess, I've got a touring show, and gallery spaces and developing works for galleries as well. But I think the partnershiping project really gave me an opportunity, because I grew up in Mount Gambier, but I live in Adelaide now. But it gave me a chance. I go back to Mount Gambier in the southeast quite regularly to kind of reckon with what it was that I guess grew me as a person, for want of better words, in that place. And Mount Gambier, with its caves and its dark soil and its pines, I think really fostered in me a way of thinking of underground spaces or gaps, or kind of these, I guess, Ross Gibson termed the Badlands of the pines, where other stories happen that you can't always grasp or know about, but they have an atmosphere and a presence. So a lot of my work was thinking about that. And I also started out this year with a very international focus, kind of thinking, I'm at that point in my career where I want to kind of expand it beyond South Australia, because I've done a lot in South Australia now. And I went to the UK and gave a talk there in February. We got back on February 26, just as COVID was really breaking out in the UK, and Italy was the talk then. and kind of came back to really have the chance to rethink what I want to do with my practice and what's meaningful for me. And what's meaningful is understanding place and the places that I love and live and have generations of knowledge, but also have those gaps, and that, you know, very much recognize that settler colonial perspective of my family and the problematic nature of that. And, you know, that to me is important. I want to stick with that and keep working through that here and from this place. So I think I've done a lot of reckoning. This kind of lockdown gave me a chance to reckon, to think about that. And I've actually started to look a lot more in terms of textile traditions and community as passing along knowledge. And it's not just knowledge for making artwork, it's knowledge for surviving. So, you know, people making...
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's a good point. Knowledge for surviving. Sorry.
Yeah, I want to spend the next few years, if I can, making connections with people. And I think this way I don't need to leave home. I can do it via Zoom these days, which is wonderful, and really develop that sense of the knowledge that's embedded within art practices and how we can foster that within communities to help ourselves as locals or bigger communities, you know, find ways forward. That I've also been reading Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything. So I'm very much about climate change and that focus at the moment.
Thanks, Sera. Fiona from Lismore Regional Gallery. Hi. I want to throw, from the basis of what Sera just said, I wanted to throw a question to you, which is a bit of a curly one. And that is that post-pandemic, not that we're out of it, but post-highly critical pandemic, there's a huge influx of tourists on their way up to Byron and the regions, or down to Tasmania. And I don't know about Mount Gambier and Townsville, but certainly there's a rethink going on about the value of living, or the cost you might pay for living in cities. Now, Lismore has a long, strong heritage of, well, let's say the Byron region or the Northern Rivers region, a long, strong heritage of welcoming outsiders and absorbing them. Do you think, Fiona, that your artists that you're dealing with in that area, which is like Tasmania, very congested, very culturally rich, are they seeing this as a problem? And the influx of...
I guess it's, you know, there's going to be varied issues that come out of that. Lismore is actually quite a different place to Byron Bay, albeit 40 minutes away. Byron Bay is, you know, outrageously expensive, and I mean, most, even professional people are struggling to, one, find a place to live, and two, if they can, you know, to be able to afford the rent, because, after years of people moving to Byron Bay, wealthy folk, and holidaying. So I think that, I could be wrong about this, but I think there's roughly 15% of people there actually live there, and the rest are tourists. Whereas Lismore is a completely different thing. It's, I think it is the most flood-prone city in Australia. And, you know, property prices are wildly different. But having said that, in the last 6 months, due to the pandemic, we are seeing a lot of people moving to the area. And so I guess that's going to put some financial stress on our local artists, but also, I guess, provide opportunities. You know, Byron Bay, we do get a lot of visitors from Byron to the gallery here in Lismore, and so that, you know, that does provide some sort of economic support from all those fairly cashed up tourists. I think local artists, you know, they're very, the Lismore-based artists are very rooted in their community. They know each other. They depend on each other. You know, it's quite a diverse community, which can be evidenced from the 4 artists that were in that came from Lismore for partnershiping. None of them were born in Lismore, and have all come from very different cultural backgrounds, and so I guess that makes them typical of the Lismore community.
So do you see that the cohesiveness of a community is cemented by by artwork?
Yeah, it is a bit, it's similar to Tasmania in that there's a very high proportion of creative people in the area. So I think, and Lismore Regional Gallery has always had a long history of public programs for children. So I feel like there's actually a generational thing where, you know, a lot of the local local community is very comfortable with coming into the gallery. So yeah, it's I guess it is a language of this area.
So from that point, if I can move across to you, Greg Lehman, because in a conversation that I had recently with you, we were talking about the change in the way that we were working as artists, and how at some core level, art making was to do with your relationship to how you think yourself. I mean, it's a conversation with yourself in some ways, but also to the very local, you know, the friends, family, relatives. You've thought about this long and hard, Greg. Tell me what you think the future is in terms of, if you were the arts minister, Greg Lehman, what would you want to encourage in the next 5 years?
Oh, I couldn't think of anything worse than being the arts minister. That question that you asked earlier on about, you know, what we might say to a room full of politicians, amongst the many things that have happened to me over the last period of COVID, is that I am heartily sick to death of listening to politicians. They've gotten worse, not better. You know, their duplicity and their self-absorption, and, you know, probably the most despicable was Morrison's shift from "we're all in this together" to opportunistically trying to undermine Dan Andrews' efforts to, you know, to turn around what was shaping up to be a metropolitan, you know, catastrophe. So I'm really, really over them. So I'm not going to try and imagine being the arts minister, sorry. But the other part of your question is really important. One of the things that COVID did, I think, in shutting the borders, was that it really, really profoundly disrupted all of the things that we've come to assumed to characterise globalisation, and particularly globalised trade. And I'm thinking also about the movement of bodies, of human bodies as well, you know, tourism. And in Tasmania in particular, putting Mona aside for a moment, and Mona is also a bit of a function of tourism, we have economically, we've had a bit of a renaissance because of tourism and all of the things that hang off that, accommodation and hospitality. And that stopped almost, well, it stopped completely. The only tourism that was going on during that period of the border closure, and don't forget that we're an island, so we're already very conscious of our coastline. The only thing that continued on was the circulation of local people. And you know, the government talks about that as being domestic tourism, but it's not tourism, it's something else. It's about people, when the tide of national and international tourists recedes, we have a chance to actually re-embrace that extended sense of place that we have on this island. You know, for I think for pretty well all Tasmanians who have lived a significant part of their life here, you know, we do embrace the whole island. It's, you know, it's like you can finally take a big, deep breath without having to worry about sucking in a whole bunch of stupidly dressed people who don't want to talk to you, yet they're wandering around, you know, in your backyard. So I've, you know, I'm like Dave. When you asked that question at the start of this session about, and I knew you wanted us to talk about life during COVID, it kind of, I felt a bit traumatized as well. It's one of those low level traumas that kind of seep into your bones without you kind of really noticing it happening. But I'm feeling now like as the borders have reopened, we have a really important challenge to hang on to what we've regained during that period, and I think we have to try and think about and name up what we've regained. And, you know, I've tried to do that in what I've been saying right now, but I think it's really important that we continue to try and name that up through our art practice, our art practices, you know, across visual arts and performance and writing, to crystallize it. Otherwise it'll get swamped.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. For me, this project, more than anything else, has given me a rich treasure trove of storytelling. And I'm so relieved that I can actually get the funding to put it into a book to give back to you, because some of those stories that I came across gives a depth to each artist's experience, which we rarely have time to do. And it's ironic that it happened during a time when we did start rethinking and recalibrating. Greg, thanks for that. I just want to duck back to Selena, because Selena, you interjected, or you're about to have, I think you had something to say about the politicians' response to the arts at the moment. And as a lead in, while you come up on screen, Selena, I just want to say that across this country, while COVID's been there, we've forgotten how charred the landscape is. We are living amidst ashes and dust of several natural cataclysms. And right throughout that landscape, there are like leader marks of heads on pikes. And those heads on pikes are artists and institutions and organizations that have either been closed over this time, or that have had all their limbs lopped from them so that they can barely survive, by something that surely it is not hyperbole to call a cultural war. Selena, go on. What were you going to say about the politics before?
I just put that in because when I was with NAVA last year and we went to Canberra to launch the Arts Day on the Hill, we met with a heap of different politicians. It wasn't very policy up, and I understand and recognise that it's a completely different terrain now, and I agree with what you're saying, that arts shredded, institutions are being completely shredded. I also think there's been a heap of money that's kind of been the tap opened and just kind of poured out into some quite short-term thinking, and that is pretty extraordinary to witness. And I think it also creates this really kind of strange terrain within the arts where there's this, on the hand, money around, and so people are, you know, desperately trying to get it. And then there's also this sense sometimes encourages this strange kind of elite projects and opportunity hoarding. But then at the same time, I don't know what a better potential policy would be. like, I think it's a really complicated position because the arts is so kind of wrapped up in the whole capitalist economy, and scarcity, you know, equates value, and all of those really dislocated kind of systems thinking. But I completely agree and resonate with what Greg was saying around this kind of inward sensitizing perspective, and we stopped having to become these exotic artists in, you know, national contexts. And that has been incredibly rewarding, that slowing down and realigning with that sincerity.
That's very true, Selena. But I guess what I'm worried about in terms of the national perspective is how much, not just the promotion of individual artists, but I was talking more about institutions like tertiary institutions that are being shut down, so that the next generation of artists aren't even going to get the chance to present.
Oh, absolutely. I think the critical faculties are being gutted, and, you know, like the really scary at that longer term level, because when you think about what's the next generation of people who come through universities going to be schooled in, and they're not going to be schooled in that same you know, like questioning and rigorous you know, like conceptual, all of the things that I feel so thankful.
Absolutely. If anybody else wants to speak on that, just raise your hand. I've got you on screen. The other thing I wanted to go back to here is something that Selena said, which was that what she's building up is knowledge for surviving. And this has come through in what a lot of you have been saying off to the side. And unfortunately, in a kind of a talk of this nature, we're not going to get deep enough into it. I want to propose that the kind of education that art gives is in part an education of teaching new languages with which to communicate, in part trying to derive thinking through handling materials, and in part using those ideas to reach more broadly. First of all, understanding yourself, and then pitching it out more broadly so that there can be new shared languages that go beyond that. And I put this to you, that during COVID shutdown, there was 3 things that stopped people on the whole from succumbing to what you described, Dave Gough, and you reiterated later on, Greg Lehman, was a low grade, let's say a malaise, a low grade fear that bubbled up every so often. Now, the 3 things I think that has kept the population relatively sane are simple things. They're love, they're laughter, and I would say art, because I defy anyone to tell me that during that lockdown in Australia, people weren't either watching podcasts or music or taking up drawing themselves. All production, I could go on, reading, all of it was cultural production, because cultural production is at the center of what it means to be human. And these are the kinds of things we should be speaking back to, especially when we're talking about, even when we're talking about economic trade. Anybody want to speak about that? Nobody. I can't see hands, so I can't really.
Can I say something? It's Sera.
Please, Sera.
I was going to say something else that I think to add to that list of not only what art does, but also what drives us is, I know I got so much value out of literature. So while I was making, I was listening to, you know, Brave New World, like Virginia Woolf, things like that. And I think what I got out of that was that art carries along intergenerational knowledge. And so art carries along knowledge from the past, and it might be knowledge that sometimes we can't put into words. We do it through handling materials or feeling in a different way beyond other ways of knowing. And for me, that's like one of the most important things, and that's what's going to keep us going into the future to get past that malaise.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I've got a comment from Linda Thorne. Can I pick up, and this is to the whole panel, are we able to get Lyndal's voice on this from a technical point of view? No?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Thanks, Lyndal. Yep, loud and clear. Can't see you, but can hear you.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just between appointments and webinars, so it's a bit all over the place. But yeah, I just think that what the pandemic taught the world was that we need art. Everybody turned to art. Governments didn't have to spend a single cent on that shift taking place. And yet, you know, I don't know, there are ways to measure the value of art in a non-commercial sense. I don't know how much of that got done, but I guess the point to make is it showed that we need art and that it's fundamental to human existence. And I just don't know how well that's been appreciated by our decision makers in Canberra. That's all.
I think you made a very good point.
Probably preaching to the conversion in making a point like that to this crowd.
But it is worth, thanks for bringing it up, Lyndal. Where are you ringing in from?
I'm from Burnie.
Oh, good. Look, I think it's a good point, but I think that part of our charge is to learn to ways of speaking back, that this stuff does come at a huge cost. Now, one of the people that's paid and is currently still paying a huge cost in terms of just the workload that he's carrying on his shoulder is Colin Langridge. Now, Colin, I'd like to ask you, this is a different kind of project. It was risky from the beginning because we had to have the gallery directors on side, and that we did. And I'm so grateful to each of them. And if it didn't have a central sort of brain there, and that's yours, it also could not have been moved on, pulled down, put up again. You've seen a few shows since you've been at CAST. You're an artist yourself. Are you prepared to be candid about whether this kind of a project is worth the effort, the human effort?
Oh, thanks, Pat. I know we talked about this the other day, so I'm sort of not surprised that you've brought that up. There was a huge effort with this project because usually a touring project, a lot of the work in developing the show's done before it goes on tour. And so with touring, we receive a complete package, and then it's just about managing that, traveling around the country, managing the freight and making sure it's installed correctly at each place and it's safe. In this one, it was a different lineup of artists at every venue. It was, and each venue had a stake in their show. They had their own local artists in it. So, it had to be managed differently at each place, and all the design material had to be redone, which is always a bit of a drama because that's where it's going public. That's where you have the list of names going up. And we did have a few hiccups along the way. We also had hiccups with the floods in Townsville. We almost got flooded on the way out at Lismore. Just missed a big rain event there, and then we were hit with COVID at Mount Gambier. So the project was, and then there was Pat's personal tragedy as well. So we were impacted by other things as well in the tour. So yes, it was a lot of work, and there's still work ongoing because we have to take down the show shortly, and then we have the catalogue to pull together. So it was more work than your usual touring show for sure. But the thing that I've just been taking notes while people have been talking, and I thought one of the things about COVID is that it's actually heightened the sense of place, which was the does place matter was the key question for this show. And that sense of, like here in Tasmania, that sense of does place matter, well, really was heightened with Burnie being the place where that was the COVID hotspot for Tasmania earlier in the year. And so there was a really strong sense of place there. In fact, almost a lockdown zone where, you had to pass through this zone to get in and out of there. And that's been the same, of course, in Melbourne and other places. So that sense of place has really been heightened right down to almost the street by street level of where is the COVID located. So I just thought that was an interesting irony with the COVID and this show, that place was actually really heightened. And the other thing in terms of place with this show was that it showed that with COVID, it was actually the more remote and regional places became privileged in a way, and it was the big urban centres that actually struggled with this, with the COVID issue. So in an interesting way, it just shows how privilege can shift very quickly depending on circumstances and people. And with us in Tasmania, other than that incident in Burnie, because we're isolated as an island like New Zealand, we're privileged in that situation. And I just think it's a very interesting point, how remoteness could in the future become very valuable. Back to you, Pat.
Oh, well, look, I am conscious of time and the fact that I'm so grateful that people have come together. I just want to say that I'm going to have a spontaneous go at answering my own question and then ask for some responses. And that is, if I was the arts minister, what I would do right now, okay? There is no arts minister, so I might as well be the arts minister. I am going to put a moratorium on purchasing any artwork from overseas artists or artists groups for the next 3 years. And any of that money that might have come into art galleries through bursaries, that has happened in a couple of major galleries, state galleries at the moment, it's got to be spent on Australian art. And part of the Australian art that it's got to be spent on, I would say 30% on the purchase of new materials, maybe 20%, 70% or 80% on art activities or processes or events or things that don't have a long lifespan and require recording, so that the emphasis is moved from the enshrinement of the object to the articulation of events that join people together in conversation, so that criticality gets ramped up, number one. Number two, I would make all art colleges partly funded by state governments ongoing forever, and see them as the centre, the cultural centres of the universities that they're in, so that everyone gets a chance to learn about the cultures of the countries in our region and to experiment with at least one subject during their course, no matter what they're doing, political science, law, medicine, in embodied learning. Number three, I would put a big proportion of funds into re-energizing the art of the regions, because every small town in the regions of Australia has an arts building, one of those old, sometimes quite simple buildings, and sometimes and quite often they're manned by the CWA. I would get them lit, just put a bit of money into aircon and lighting, the bricks and mortar are there, and start national touring operations that would get those things energized and local communities realizing the difference of their cultures. And then, of course, as part of that, I'd get the Ministry for Roads and Transport to stop building roads and to build rail right across the country, because we've been needing that for so long. It would employ people. It just makes absolute sense. Responses. Greg has his hand up to speak. Greg.
I'll vote for you. Sorry, I was listening then. First bit of political diatribe I've found worth listening to for ages. Just to build on that idea of getting the states directly and permanently involved in supporting art education. Older people amongst us might remember a thing called Green Corps. Sometimes referred to in the media as the Green Army, and this was a program to rather than having people unemployed, to employ them to get involved in conservation, land management, conservation stuff. What we need, in association with an increased number of graduates from these art schools and colleges, is an art army. And the graduates have a living wage that they can confidently know is going to exist at the end of their course. And they can go out and engage with their local and regional communities and do their thing, which is what art always was, kind of up until, I don't know what, the Industrial Revolution. You know, that's what artists did. They were the kind of the beating creative heart of communities, small local communities, and travelling artists were the media. They were the storytellers and sharers of innovation as they travelled around their region. I think we need something like that. Let's do it.
It's a great response. You know, I was involved with the Australian Flying Art School for 8 years, and certainly when we went through light playing to the regions of Queensland and northern New South Wales, partly what we were doing was taking those packaged stories. And I would like to hope that partly that's what this project has been doing too, has joined us together across the 4 states in a single vision. I mean, I know that it hasn't occupied your consciousness completely, but I hope that everybody has been somewhat aware of what's happened at the various destinations. Yeah? Fiona, you were going to make a response before too when Greg was speaking.
Yeah, sure. Well, I too would vote for you, Pat, so please do put your hand up for that. And, you know, I was just thinking about the landscape for the arts, and, you know, as a teenager and in my 20s, I think my parents sort of really discouraged me from, you know, getting into being an artist because they were worried about whether I would have any sort of financial security in life. And unfortunately, it seems like ever since then, I don't think we realized perhaps how good it was, but ever since then, it's just been an ongoing chopping of funding and pruning back and reducing of opportunities. I remember when I was at Queensland College of Art doing my undergrad, even then it was, you know, the university was trying to prune back the number of studio areas, and there was the, you know, the complete loss of, for instance, ceramics, which will never come back. And 20 or more years later, it's still happening. It's continued to happen the whole time. I mean, the amount of state government funding in New South Wales for the arts has just plummeted. Many regional galleries this year didn't receive any annual funding. And it's just, it's just beggars belief how artists manage to survive in that sort of climate. And I do know why, because they can't, you know, they can't do anything but make art. They, you know, they're compelled to tell stories and fight even harder. But if only people in power had more of an art education, perhaps through some of your initiatives you've just proposed, Pat, they may appreciate how much artists contribute to culture.
I want to pick you up on something, Fiona, there. It was about your own education and how you ended up employed in not one job, but you've never had a shortage of jobs in your whole time since you left college. There was always someone asking you, would you work for them? The thing that has surprised me a great deal lately is a number of students who've come back, alumni, and said it was the same for them. They've gone out of art college and been fully employed all their lives in an area which might not be directly associated with the visual arts, but for which the visual arts training had equipped them with a range of skills that made them very employable and continued to make them employable, always questioning themselves, always seeking out new responses, always thinking laterally and things like that. So that has come back because of the kind of pushback we've had up here in Queensland. I want to move from that onto something about, do artists change things? And something I wrote recently, which I heard from a scientist originally. Culture changes things much more quickly than biology does. Culture actually changes biology. Culture is faster than biology. Now think about it. Think about it in species other than humans and about the domestication of animals over a certain period of time. And then think about humans that have lived in particular parts of the world. And they develop particular kinds of tendencies because of where they live, who they live with, and what their lifestyle is. That as cultural changes, then makes the body adapt in different ways. Hence, we look different. We may not always, but we have for a while. Now, in Australia, I'm going to say that in this little corner of southeast Queensland, there are three fundamental changes in the way that we have seen ourselves, and some of them have impacted on the rest of the country, and all of them have been driven by art. The first thing was the Australian Flying Art School, which taught us to think about the possibility that art was just as rich potentially growing from the regions as it was from the metropolitan areas. I believed that, and I still do. And it gave some people strength to think, well, maybe all this also happens in the Indigenous world, and that there are people living in the cities, not just in the great outback, who have got very strong things to say, who are Indigenous and First Nations people. Out of that belief came Bovakai, the first Indigenous teaching by Indigenous people at the Queensland College of Art for only First Nations people. And from that, we had Propanar, and from that, we had the Balance Show in 1990. Now, there wouldn't be anybody in this country who doesn't know the wealth and the value and the importance, and across the world, of Indigenous voices and what they have to know in terms of knowledge. The third thing I want to say is that that belief that culture might grow from the regions also spearheaded the first Asia Pacific Triennial. When we mooted it, most people who were curators in other states said, but all you'll get when you go beyond there is basket weaving and ikat or tie-dye. And then we got from that point in 1993 to realizing that culture in the region was just as rich, and it is homegrown, it is local, it is vibrant, and it is responding to these huge global issues of our time in small, local, focused ways. Now, those three changes on how we think about ourselves as Australians came through art, not through policy and legislation, not through business.
So in terms of the question of changes done by culture and by biology, and which one produces quicker changes, I think that when they both work in sync, the changes are the biggest and the most dramatic. And I'll only point out to the contribution of the Black Death to the Renaissance. If it wasn't for the Black Death, we wouldn't have such changes. I mean, some of these famous towns of the Renaissance just, mere decades before that, lost 50 to 75% of the population. After which change was necessary, change was wanted, change was needed, and there was no way how the people in power could prevent those changes. because the demand came from below, and even in terms of labor was suddenly paid much more than it was before, because there was no one to work, so they needed to pay the laborers much more. So yeah, I mean, I think that the COVID-19 is maybe not such a radical disruption of society as the Black Death was, but it is a disruption maybe on par with the Spanish plague after World War I. We didn't have 50 million dead, but I think that this time it's even more global. We had, from what they say, is like 1.5 million dead, maybe, who's counting them in Africa and Brazil and India, but the numbers are huge in any case. So it's not just about the survivors. It's about the change of our psyche, and the change of these sort of rigid structures that we've made, even in globalism, even in the past 20 years. The structures which have been implemented are bound to change. Quite interestingly, we're in the middle of the Video Art Festival, which is called International Video Art Festival, but based in Mount Gambier, the Limestone Coast. We received more than 1,800 submissions for the festival. Can you believe that? That's more than 1,800 submissions. So the jury had a really hard work to select the 30, and I had curated another 10. And it was a very intriguing process. We also did telematic sort of COVID-19 encounters, and quite a few projects which were based online, but were presented not only online, but also onto the walls, like projected screens onto the walls of our gallery space, on the outside walls, as well as in the gallery itself. So the format is changing as well. And the impact is changing because now the University of South Australia, who, by the way, supported us with bringing researchers and a few of their professors were teaching workshops here, but now they want our content, the content that was gathered for this festival, to be presented in Adelaide. So in a way, it's ideas can travel much faster and in more interesting ways now, and I think we should be able to grasp that moment.
I think that's absolutely true. Going back to what another thread of the conversation is, how it was what gets lost when people think that they can get culture for nothing. Funding gets lost. Going back to your point, what gets lost when we know we can depend on something like Zoom to teach a class or to converse? The materiality of someone's presence or the objects with which we work, that's what gets lost. And we can't afford to have one without the other. And so, whereas the Partnershiping Project has had a big online presence, and it will have a material output in, thank God, in the form of a book, the story becomes layered, becomes richer, becomes modulated so much more by the fact that all those things were put in a traveling box, just like all the goods that are produced globally are produced and traveled from one place to the next. There's all kinds of stories accrue because of the difficulties of, let's say, positive friction. Because as soon as you talk about materials, you've got the possibility of friction, the meeting of two surfaces. And that brings about a kind of an energy, a knowledge that going straight through smoothly down the lines, you don't get it.
I completely agree. I am loving this conversation. I'm also loving Selena's kind of conundrum that she's put there about climate change and pace as well, because I think there is this, we're kind of, I don't know, it's something I can't really put into words, but existing between these different ways of being at the moment, and that is the opportunities with Zoom, but also what's lost through not coming into, you know, that sensorial presence with materials and people. And yeah, I don't know, I can't articulate it, but there's something for me there, particularly, and I was drawn to Selena's point about pace. I think there's something about doing things by hand that you learn. It's kind of a natural pace, or a pace that's in tune with the climate around you. And then we're kind of shuttled in between other paces as well. And it's that shuttling for me, which is a little bit discombobulating, and maybe that's where some of the malaise about this time comes from as well. But that's something I'm working through with my practice at the moment.
Thanks a lot, Selena. Now, as you say, sorry, thanks very much, Sera. As you say, Selena has made a great point that she's written about. She says, so if culture can change things faster than biology and evolution, can it change, or does it change things faster than climate change? Selena, you have been working with this kind of thing for a long, long time. I want to say, perhaps sounding like Pollyanna, that if we all did change our cultural practices, we could turn this whole behemoth around. What do you think? We could change the world into, culturally is the way we've got to make these changes. Selena, what do you think about this?
Well, in theory, I strongly agree. In reality, the manifestation of that, I think, is complicated. And then I guess recently as well, I was listening to Benjamin Bratton and his terraforming lectures, and in it he posits, I guess, the conundrum again that culture costs more than perhaps we realise. And in that sense, he was mounting the argument that if cultural funding was steered into climate change solutions, which again I think are problematic, that would perhaps shift the boat. But intrinsically I agree. I think, you know, like the cultural kind of separation from the environment, and if we could shift that ontologically, and the kind of relational epistemology of being connected to place broadly, it would definitely change. But how to do that? I mean, I don't want to sound like an art missionary is the other thing, because I respect other people's ways and practices of being. So it's tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky, but I really I mean, okay, say I'm the arts minister again, and I'm saying, I've listened to Selena de Carvalho, and I say, that girl's right. And so, or any funding, this is what used to happen in the Australia Council. It happens to an extent less now, but when I was on the Professional Development of Artists Committee, there was a grid where if people fell onto that grid in a particular way, they had far more chance of getting funding. And if it had priorities attached to it, like, for example, the environment, they were the ones who had much more chance of getting up. Yeah. Sometimes on some years it was for cultural diversity. So, I mean, you could definitely skew it towards projects that have some kind of outcomes that do go towards some way towards this sort of solving these real world problems. I mean, tell me I'm wrong, but again, sounding a bit like Pollyanna, I think that a project of this kind, for me, is much more interesting, stroke valuable, stroke productive, stroke potentially an instrument of change, than something that you just sign off on and then say, off you trot, you know, do your tour and then come back. But I could be wrong. I could be very wrong. I often am. So as you said, Selena, you're always in that danger zone of sounding a bit like you want art to have another rationale tied to it that goes beyond just art. And that is dangerous because it becomes cultural engineering. But you know what? Culture is engineered anyway, because it's engineered to fit into curators, mainstream curators and mainstream white wall galleries. Anyway, if anybody doesn't feel pressed, this could go on for, you know, several weeks, this discussion. Julie, I'm going to ask you for a quick, we're going to try to wrap it up in 5 minutes, but Julie, got a response to any of the things I've said?
Oh, I'm just thinking, I'm kind of drifting all over the place, but I'm just, yeah, how to kind of find the funds that are floating and kind of being distributed in sometimes interesting ways. That could they be infiltrated or remodeled? Like I just wrote that about you know, public artworks, and could there be a secondary potential output in that realm that has public outreach, has the kind of, like you talk about the Flying Art School. I'm going to kind of want to research that model of bringing people together. And perhaps there's other ways we could redistribute funding that's already happening, which isn't necessarily a good solution, but I'm just trying to think of where we can, you know, how we can think about what's happening out there. And yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not really wrapping it up. I'm just, it's got me.
Okay, good thoughts. And I can see you're asking a couple of questions there. Could the public art model, where big funding is put into essentially what we could call monuments, being extended for some other kinds of ways? Let me just throw this into the mix. As soon as you've got a monument, you are giving your public a ticket to get off the hook for remembering. What you are doing as an official institution, erecting that thing, saying, now off you all trot, we've done the remembering for you. Otherwise, remembering is something that has to be doing what the word it says, to remember, member of the body, bring people together, whether it's every Sunday in a church, or whether it's at a festival, or whether it's an annual, you know, seasonal thing. People have to come together. The basis of that is communication with each other. So, you know, public monuments get in the way of that. So I'm saying to you, yes. Storytelling, yes. Getting together, yes. Joining history to the now, to the future, yes. And that would be a good way of putting emphasis on bringing our community together, because Joe Biden knows the biggest task that he's got with that country at the moment is to make sense of that country in a cohesive way again. And in many ways, that's true for us too in this country. I don't think we know who we are. Okay, Dave.
That's a really, really good point, that it's in redefining. And I think, like what you're saying, as long as Biden doesn't go down the old patriotic route, this is where we have this patriotism and these sort of things that are causing these divisions. And if we actually bring people to place, as in to environment, like I'm guilty of that, you know, that's one thing that drives me, is to get people to actually understand that they're organic, they're part of the environment. We are, you know, and for them to then, if they go through and break that down and then feel it, you know, so I'm very much about the feeling of the environment, and that is a platform that everyone, wherever you're from, you know, I can bring you into our country and you'll feel things, but I've felt that in other people's countries too. So it's that environment is really important. And I think health outcomes, you know, we can rip bits and pieces of health out, you know, funding to deliver people to gather on in the environment for the health outcomes. But, you know, we've got to be, it's unfortunate, but we're always got to be smart, as in how can we make cultural shift and change, and we can do that through other funding bodies, I think. So, I mean, I've used health to do things that have been called artworks, or they've been called, you know, so it's like that, but it's more about gathering people on an environment so that they can't look, if they're looking at the environment that they're in, and they feel it, they're less likely to want to destroy or disrupt it, because you know, in a way, it's like, look, you know, if you're like looking at your mother, you know, looking in the mirror. It's I think that immersion is really, really important. So I hope they can we can build. We have the opportunity from COVID, and we're just going straight back to the discussing industries that are destroying us, rather than taking that time to look at what we're doing. I kind of realised when I was in Wales that the National Theatre Wales and the Natural Resource Management and all the teams that sort of brought me there were planting trees in Scotland to, you know, go against what it costs to get me there. And that was, you know, for me, I opened my eyes and thought, wow, actually, yeah, every time we're traveling, we're doing all these things to the environment. You know, and now we're in a digital way of doing these things. It's less, but it's less personal. So how can we have the digital and the personal? So because we're not, you know, we have an education resource that's in a black box that goes into schools around our state, and people, you know, open the box and look at our cultural objects, and then they zoom to a cultural educator. And that was kind of more meant for schools in really remote districts, but a lot of schools are grabbing it, and then they're kind of, well, they're missing out on the person, you know. So it's about the person needs to be, you know. So I've kind of like, you know, and with digital resource with cultural learning as well. I walk into a school, they've been watching me on a screen for the last so many months. I'll sort of walk in, they're like, oh wow, you're actually here, and you know, they. I was like, yeah, it's all of a sudden like, oh, it's got a kangaroo skin, or it's real person, you know. So it's interesting that, and I just think that we can. It's a shame that we have to be smart to figure out where we can, because there is, you know, there's a lack of funding, and everybody's going for the same funding. But health and other ways that we can, you know, we can
Leverage, yeah.
Leverage, yeah.
Thanks, Dave. Look, and thanks for the work you've done and the others have done in just embedding it in the place that you are. I think that's so very vital. And it's very sad for me that I haven't been able to actually press the flesh with a lot of you guys because of the things that happened, because that was part of my want to do this project. At the beginning, is to actually be there at those places, watch that thing unfold in particular ways. That was robbed from me, but I've gotten other things, I think. So I want to wrap this up, because I know that I have to, because you all have lives beyond this. And again, I want to return to really saying a heartfelt thanks to those of you who are here. It doesn't exist without the effort and energy that you've put into it. And also for those who aren't here too, let's see where we can go from here. We're working on the publication as we speak, and some of the issues that we raised today might find their way into it in the intro. But it's always good to close things when you think, but there's so much more to say. And I want to hear what she means about that. And I want to hear what he did about that. And that's how I'm left feeling, that I do want to continue this, whether it's even possible, I don't know. But in the meantime, just know that I'm really grateful to each of you for having met you and for having supported what I think's been a damn fine project. Thank you. And thank you especially, Colin. Where are you?
Yeah.
You can cut our throats now, Col. Is that the time you want it to finish?
Yes. Well, it's been an hour and a half. I think it's a nice amount of time.
Okay. Thank you.
And we can the conversation can continue through us all as artists, and through us all communicating with each other and communicating with the public. And I think what's happened today is we've all seen how we have so much in common through these conversations, even though we're separated through places, and even we're separated through time, funnily enough, the time zones. But we're separated, but we all see these things in common. We have common experiences. And I think that's what's been the benefit of this project, us all meeting each other, getting to share. As Pat was saying, she that was disrupted for her, but that's what this project was about community and artists reaching out to their community, but also in meeting each other and in these different regional galleries, all having an equal input into the project, not just as with a normal touring project, there's a big creative input at the beginning and then everyone else just becomes the host of it. In this case, it was equal input right around the country in all these different regional areas. So thank you. And it's been a wonderful experience, but it's going to continue with the publication. And I imagine Pat might be in touch with each of you, maybe in touch. I can't speak on your behalf, Pat, but you may be seeking out further information for the catalogue.
Look, I've got a lot of information, just as long as I'll put a standard letter out saying that everybody's cool with me using the information that we've already used online will be used in the catalogue. I hope that's cool with you, and images too. If not, let me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pat and Colin and everyone. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah, and it's not goodbye in any means from me. So I'd love to chat to you all again.
Okay, take care. Bye, Kelly Slater too. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.